No one wakes up and says, "I want to strangle a duke with a lute string and hide in a barrel for 3 days." Becoming an assassin wasn't a childhood dream. It was more of a last resort, a career option only if every other door and most windows were firmly closed. Most medieval assassins were not monks with secret scrolls or orphans trained by candlelight in mountaintop monasteries. They were discarded people. Thieves, deserters, outlaws, people so far outside society, awareness that they could stab a baron in the back and still not get counted in the census. Imagine being so invisible that murder barely registers as a change in your social standing. If you had anything, land, livestock, family, you hired an assassin. If you had nothing and were quiet on your feet, you became one. That coin purse on the table wasn't a gift. It was a gamble. Slide it across, whisper a name. Usually someone powerful, heavily guarded, often beloved, sometimes paranoid. Never easy. And your reward? Maybe a few silver coins. Maybe betrayal. Maybe death. But let's not rush. We'll get there slowly. For now, just imagine the flicker of torchlight on wet cobblestones, the smell of tallow smoke, unwashed leather, and cheap wine. The soft shuffle of your boots as you step into a job you'll never be remembered for. Because being an assassin wasn't about fame, it was about disappearing perfectly. Let's walk quietly now. You took the job. Not because you were gifted or noble or chosen by some moonlit prophecy whispered among hooded monks. No, you took it because you were broke, invisible, and just lucky, or unlucky, enough to be holding a knife when someone needed a problem to go away. So naturally one might assume you were trained, that there was some kind of preparation, a mentor, a scroll, a dusty handbook tucked in the folds of your tattered cloak, titled Quiet Death for Beginners. But no, there was no training. No one ever looked you in the eye and said, "Lesson 1, don't trip on the chambermaid." You simply learned by trying, by failing, by almost dying, and sometimes by actually dying. The truth is, most assassins in medieval times weren't skilled warriors from distant temples. They were desperate men who used to shovel hay or swing a rusty sword for a lord who forgot their name. And if you were lucky enough to still have both knees working and a basic understanding of how doors functioned, you were considered highly qualified. Training? If you learned anything, it was from your first botched job, sneaking into what you thought was a noble's private chamber, only to discover you'd just stepped into the pantry. Again. The cook dropped a spoon. You dropped your confidence. And then you ran. That was your lesson for the night. Memorize the layout next time. Don't confuse the wine cellar with the bedroom. Also remember your knife. Some learned on the battlefield. Former soldiers knew how to hold a blade, sure, but stealth, timing, the difference between stabbing a guard in armor and a merchant in bed. That was a different curriculum, a darker one. One where your professor was experienced, your classroom was a rooftop in the rain, and your final exam was, "Don't get caught." As for poisons, those weren't elegant solutions passed down by ancient herbal masters. They were more like awkward guesses. Heard about a root, crushed a mushroom, tossed in something that smelled like death and hoped it didn't just make the target burp and ask for more stew. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes your target vomited dramatically and survived. Sometimes you drank the wrong cup. That's how you learned. There were no guild meetings, no mentor figures showing you the proper wrist angle or how to walk without squeaking on cobblestones. If anyone did show you something useful, like how to silence a scream or climb through a stained glass window without dying, it was usually seconds before they disappeared forever. Your gear wasn't special either. You didn't have a gleaming set of Assassin S tools, lovingly oiled and arranged in a velvet-lined box. You had whatever you stole, scavenged, or found in the pocket of a man who wouldn't be needing it anymore. A dagger, maybe a rope, Occasionally, a spoon sharpened into a point, whatever fit in a boot or under your tunic and didn't clink when you walked. So when someone asked, "Where did you train?" if anyone dared ask, which they usually didn't, you might have said something vague. "Oh, I studied in the shadows." But really, you trained in alleyways. You trained in failure, in terror, in guessing where the guards were and hoping the dog didn't bark this time, in sneaking past maids who never seemed to sleep, and climbing towers while telling yourself not to sneeze. Not now, not on the ledge. You became skilled not through lessons, but through pain. You learned to avoid eye contact, to breathe through your nose, to lie without blinking, to never trust a job that paid too much up front. And most of all, you learned that survival was not a result of talent. It was luck. Quiet, bitter, exhausted luck. So no, you weren't trained. You were shaped by hunger, by fear, and by the constant knowledge that you weren't supposed to be here, that every job might be your last, that every coin might be a trap, and that you were always one misstep away from a noose, away. Still, you kept going. Not because you believed in the cause or justice or fate, but because it was either this or starve. And at least this way you got to keep moving. At least for now. You took the job for the coin. Let's not pretend it was for glory or duty or some whispered calling in the wind. You were hungry, and someone promised silver. That was enough. At least, that's what you told yourself. But in the world of medieval assassination, payment was never quite what it seemed. The first lie came early, usually during the handshake, or more accurately, the whispered name exchanged in the back room of a tavern that smelled like wet bread and regret. The client, hooded of course, promised half now, half later. "When it's done," they said. That phrase should have told you everything. When it's done was code. It meant, when I've verified the kill, when I'm sure you didn't botch it, when I'm convinced you won't come back to blackmail me, and, most importantly, when you're no longer breathing. See, hiring a killer was always a messy business, but paying a killer, that was dangerous. Because once the job was complete, you were a liability. You knew names, faces, secrets, routes through palace walls that weren't on any map. You had the power to burn someone's world down with a single sentence. So naturally they planned to pay you with silence. Or steal. It wasn't personal, it was protocol. And yet you kept taking the jobs, because the pouch of silver coins clinked just enough to imagine warmth, bread, a blanket, maybe even a night in a real bed where no one asked your name or checked your boots for blood. You dreamed just for a moment of sitting by a fire and not checking every shadow. But then the job ended. The blade found its mark. The blood came quietly. And when you returned for payment, if you dared return, you were met with a different kind of silence. The innkeeper shrugged. The room was empty. The client gone, or worse, waiting, with a backup plan and a replacement killer crouched behind the curtain. Because why pay someone when you can simply erase them? And even when you were paid, and that was rare, it never felt right. The silver weighed wrong in your hand, sticky, cold, as if it remembered where it came from. And sometimes it wasn't silver at all, just lead coins dipped in soot, or a promise of more work to come, better pay next time. Next time. And so you learned, you stopped trusting, you started asking for everything up front. Even then, you watched every angle, checked every doorway, slept with your back to stone. Because being owed a debt in your line of work was just a poetic way of saying you wouldn't live long enough to collect. Some contracts, it turned out, weren't even real. They were traps, political setups. You'd be told to eliminate a corrupt baron, easy enough, only to discover he was bait. Guards waiting, a noose already knotted, your name scribbled on a scroll before you even crossed the moat. You couldn't appeal. There was no Office of Assassin Affairs, no contract law. If your client betrayed you, you didn't take them to court, you vanished, or you struck first, or most likely you died in the mud with a knife in your hand. And a question still forming on your lips. But you said, And if by some miracle you survived the betrayal, got your coin, walked away, that didn't mean you were safe. It just meant you had a new enemy, one who knew what you could do, one who couldn't afford to let you keep doing it. So you kept moving, changing names, changing towns, spending only half your payment, hiding the rest under floorboards, behind bricks, in hollow trees, because you never knew when you'd need to disappear again. The lie wasn't just in the coin, it was in the whole arrangement. The handshake, the whispered name, the promise that this job would change everything. It did, mostly by shortening your future. You learned eventually that the real currency wasn't silver. It was silence, the ability to vanish, to leave no trail. Because in your world, the only honest payment was the one you never had to collect, the one that let you walk away, alone, unnoticed, and still breathing. At least, for now. Let's talk about the tools of your trade, not the elegant cinematic kind with gleaming blades and dramatic flair. No. What you had was far more humble, more tragic, really. You didn't carry exotic weapons forged by secret guilds or dipped in venom from sacred snakes. Your gear was whatever you could steal, sharpen, or hide without clanking when you walked. And it rarely worked the way it was supposed to. A dagger. That's all you had most nights. Not a beautiful one. Not engraved or balanced or kissed by moonlight. Just a dull, rust-pocked bit of iron you pulled off a dead guard S-belt in Haven, if he had time or solvent, to clean since. The hilt wrapped in old cloth, the blade slightly bent. But it was yours. It made you feel not powerful, exactly. Just prepared. Almost. Sometimes you dream of having a proper blade, weighted, balanced, with a sheath that didn't stab you in the thigh when you crouched. But dreams are luxuries, and in your line of work, luxuries made you soft. Soft people didn't last long. Poison? Yes, you tried that too, with mixed results. You ground herbs with a rock, boiled roots in water that smelled like copper, took careful notes in the margins of a stolen recipe book, and still, it was mostly guesswork. Some poisons made your target dizzy, some made them vomit, some just made their soup taste like regret, and sometimes you drank the wrong cup. There was no poison control in the Middle Ages, no quick antidote or support scroll, just your own judgment and the hope that whatever you slipped into the chalice wouldn't come back to haunt you via your own bloodstream. Then there was the rope, always handy, always fickle, good for climbing, for choking, for tying off distractions, but only if you remembered the knots, the right ones, the ones that didn't come undone in the middle of an escape across a wet stone wall. Nothing quite ruins a job like falling into the pig pens while muttering, "Was it the rabbit loop or the sailor's bend?" Crossbows? Don't make me laugh. Those were expensive, loud, unwieldy. They belonged to mercenaries and spoiled knights. You couldn't exactly sneak one under your cloak while pretending to be a chimney sweep. And even if you had one, where would you find a bolt that wasn't bent, broken, or lodged in someone already? Smoke bombs, hidden blades, secret darts. Those were fairy tales. You worked with what fit in your boot. A nail, a bone pin, a piece of glass smoothed just enough not to slice your fingers. If it could cut and didn't smell like last week's stew, it was good enough. And don't forget clothing. You didn't have special armor. Your cloak was frayed at the edges, your boots cracked, your gloves mismatched. Everything you wore was designed not to protect you, but to help you vanish. Into shadows, into crowds, into back alleys that reeked of damp wood and urine, because the goal was never to look prepared. It was to look invisible. So you packed your tools carefully, like sacred relics. The dagger wrapped in cloth, the rope coiled in silence, the tiny bottle of cloudy liquid you hoped wouldn't kill you by proximity, and you carried them close. Because in the end, these weren't just tools. They were the only companions you could trust. But they failed you. They always did eventually. The dagger caught on cloth mid-swing, the rope snagged on a broken tile, the poison took too long. The shoes made noise you didn't expect. Your gear wasn't enchanted, it wasn't made by masters. It was stitched together by desperation and rust. And it always reminded you, at the worst possible time, that you were not a hero. You were someone with a spoon, pretending it was a sword. And when it all went wrong, as it often did, you improvised. A loose roof tile, a shard of pottery, a candlestick with enough weight to end a life, if you had the angle and the nerve. There were no upgrades, no fancy workbenches to tinker with your kit between jobs. You didn't polish your dagger under candlelight. You prayed it didn't snap in the ribs of someone 3 times your size, because it wasn't the tools that killed, it was you. Quiet, exhausted, and halfway convinced this would be your last job, and still you wrapped that dagger, tucked it under your belt, tightened the straps of those failing boots, and walked back into the night. Because no matter how many times your gear betrayed you, it was still better than going in empty-handed, and that somehow was enough. You were never sent to kill a drunk baker. No one ever slid a coin pouch across the table and whispered, "Take care of Thomas, the guy who naps behind the mill." That would have been too easy, too clean, too survivable. No. Your targets were always the same type. Important, protected, paranoid. The kinds of people who had enough enemies to expect someone like you, and enough power to make your job feel like a very long, very quiet suicide attempt. Nobles, bishops, commanders. Royal cousins with suspiciously short lifespans. Men and women with titles, wealth, bodyguards, and the kind of insomnia that came from knowing a knife might be coming for their throat in the middle of the night. You weren't slipping into a cabin. You were scaling walls, crossing moats, and memorizing patrol routes by candlelight with shaking hands and an empty stomach. Let's start with the guards. Not 1 or 2 half-asleep men playing dice. Dozens, armed, armored, and fueled by privilege and paranoia. Some watched the gates, others paced the halls. A few just stood there, full of muscles and hatred, daring anyone to blink the wrong way. These weren't lazy guards from stories. These were professionals who'd already crushed 2 uprisings and 1 wayward scribe. Then there were the walls. Castles weren't just buildings. They were passive-aggressive death machines, stone teeth, archery slits, boiling oil dispensers. Moats that may or may not have eels in them, but definitely had disease. And even if you swam it, climbed the wall, dodged the guards, congratulations. You've reached the courtyard where the dogs live. Yes, dogs. Big ones, smart ones, bred specifically to recognize the sound of a footstep that doesn't belong. You moved like a whisper. They moved like judgment. Fast, angry judgment with teeth. You learned quickly that even shadows betray you, because the servants notice, the cooks, the chambermaids, the page boys with nothing better to do than memorize every face they've ever seen. And if your disguise slips even for a second, if you call the wrong noble "my lord" instead of "your grace," they'll whisper before you finish your sentence. And gossip? It travels faster than you. You could stab a man in the throat and someone 3 halls away would already be describing your cloak to the guard captain before he finishes chewing his stew. But the worst part, the actual target. Because they were never just there, they rotated rooms, ate in different wings of the palace every night, changed routes. Kept a food taster, a wine sniffer, and a priest on retainer just in case the gods needed to be bribed in real time. And if you heard they were attending a feast, don't get excited. Feasts are chaos, yes, they're drunk, but so is everyone else, including you, probably. And you'll still have to get past 2 elite guards, a hawk-eyed steward, 1 court jester who never blinks, and 40 guests holding knives they call eating tools. Even when the opportunity came, even when the moon aligned, the guard turned his head, and the noble stood just 1 breath away. You had 1 shot. 1 clean, silent, perfect, non-squeaky boot kind of shot. Because if it got messy, if you made noise, if the blade caught on fabric or bone, it was over. And you wouldn't die clean. You'd be a lesson, a public one, tied to a post, hung from the gate with a sign that read, "Nice try." Because the targets were never easy. They weren't meant to be. You were never hired for possible jobs. You were hired because someone wanted to gamble, to see if it could be done. If the impossible could be undone by one man with bad boots, shaking hands, and a rusty knife wrapped in a prayer. And if you did it, if you somehow pulled it off, no one celebrated. They just made sure you didn't live long enough to do it again. But that's for later. For now, let's keep moving. There's still a lot of castle left between you and your target, and the moon's beginning to rise. Let's say, by some miracle, you made it past the outer walls, past the guards, past the dogs, past the moat that probably gave you a skin rash you'll never explain. Now you're inside, the halls are close, the voices are muffled. The target is maybe, just maybe, one corridor away. Now what? You blend in. At least that's the idea. Disguises in the Middle Ages weren't tailored cloaks or sleek black assassin suits. They weren't sleek at all. They were goat-smelling robes, borrowed boots, stolen belts, and a deep hope that no one looked too closely at your face. There were no costume departments, no wardrobe changes in the back room. You wore what you could find and or steal. If you could pass for a monk, great. Put on a robe 2 sizes too big. Walk with your head down and mutter something about penance. If you were lucky enough to steal a servant's outfit, congrats. You now had to know who the cook was married to, what the dog's name was, and which hallway always smells like onions. Because one wrong detail, and you weren't just a stable hand. You were the weird new guy who asks too many questions and doesn't know where the privy is. And masks? Forget them. If you covered your face, you looked like a leper. Or worse, a criminal. And nothing invites attention faster than trying not to have a face in a room full of bored guards and overly chatty ladies-in-waiting. No, you had to act the part. You had to become the part. Which meant learning to limp convincingly, to fake a cough, to smell like hay, to smile just enough to look harmless but not enough to be memorable. You had to know when to nod, when to bow, when to carry something heavy just to seem useful. You had to memorize names, avoid eye contact, and, above all, never stop moving. Because stillness meant questions, and questions meant, well, you didn't come this far to be asked what you are doing in the bishop's laundry room with a sword and a very suspicious hat. And even if your disguise worked, even if no one looked at you twice, there was still the timing. The waiting. You couldn't strike too soon or too late. You had to hover like a ghost, pretend to sweep, refill goblets, carry folded linens while watching a nobleman chew his pheasant and wondering, is now the moment? Is this the blink in history where everything changes? Of course, sometimes there was no moment. Sometimes the target changed rooms. Sometimes the guards didn't blink. Sometimes your fake mustache made you sneeze, and you had to vanish again. Slip back into the shadows, peel off your goat-smelling robe and whisper to yourself, next time, maybe next time. Because disguises weren't armor. They were illusions, thin, frayed, barely held together by thread and hope. And if you were lucky, if you made it through a whole evening without being questioned, stabbed, or recognized, then congratulations. You lived to lie another day. Because in this job, the only truth that mattered was that you were never who you said you were, and if you were, you didn't last long. But we're not done yet. You still have the blade, and the night is just beginning. So, Idiman, let's suppose you've made it this far. Past the gate, past the guards, through the hallways, disguised as Brother Tobias, the world's most nervous monk. Or maybe Tom, a candle boy who clearly doesn't know where the candles go. Now it's time to use your training. Except, here's the thing, there was no training. None. You didn't wake up at dawn in a mountaintop monastery, meditate with incense, then spar with wooden daggers in the mist. You weren't taught the art of the silent kill by a master with one eye and a tragic past. There was no montage, no flute music. If you learned anything, it was by failing and not dying. Usually. The truth? Most medieval assassins were amateurs. Very desperate amateurs. If you had military experience, that helped. At least you knew which side of the knife to hold. If you were a former thief, maybe you were good at not making noise while moving. If you were just a desperate peasant with good aim and a strong stomach, well, congratulations. That's enough for someone to whisper a name to you and slide a coin purse across the table. Your first mission probably didn't go smoothly. Maybe the blade got stuck. Maybe your target turned out to be sleeping with one eye open. Maybe you forgot that castle windows are very narrow and people scream louder when falling through them. That's how you learned. Trial. And very messy error. There were no manuals, no diagrams of pressure points, no pamphlets on 10 common exit routes and how to avoid dying in them. You figured it out as you went, by watching, listening, running, climbing, hiding, bleeding. You learned to trust instincts over logic. You learned which floorboards creak and which steps echo. You learned that noblemen don't always sleep in the same bed, and that not all guards are equally sober. Poison? You didn't get a recipe, you got rumors. Some herbs made you sick, some made you sleepy. Some made your target dance wildly and then drop dead 3 days later, or they just sneezed a lot. You had no way to test dosage, unless you wanted to try it yourself. And even then, results varied, sometimes spectacularly. If you were lucky, and by lucky I mean miraculously not dead yet, you might have picked up a few tricks from an older assassin, if one ever decided to mentor you. Which was rare, because assassins didn't form clubs, they didn't hold workshops, they didn't do trust falls or leave reviews. They disappeared, sometimes permanently. Weapons training? Let's not romanticize. You didn't carry a broadsword like a knight. You didn't dual-wield daggers with flair. You had whatever didn't make noise when you walked. A blade stolen from a guard. A garrote if you were feeling confident. A sharp spoon if things got weird. Your fighting style was panic with purpose. Precision through adrenaline. Efficiency born of knowing you'd die if you didn't to get it right the first time. And you only had one chance. If you missed, you didn't get a second. You got tackled, interrogated, or hurled from a balcony into something unpleasant, like cobblestones or boiling oil. So no, you weren't a master of anything. You were a survivor. And survival was your curriculum. The bruises were your diploma. And the knowledge that every moment could be your last. That was your graduation speech. And still, the job called. The coin gleamed. The target waited. And all you had were your instincts, your scars, and your quietly shaking hands. So, you've done the unthinkable. You've slipped into the fortress, bypassed the guards, crept through candle-lit corridors that smell like sweat, mildew, and bad decisions, and you've done it. The blade struck. The noble gasped, more from surprise than pain. It was over before it began. Congratulations. Now where's your money? Ah yes, the payment. Let's talk about that. Because here's the thing about coins in medieval times. They jingle, they gleam, and they lie. When you were first approached, someone probably made it sound simple. You do the job, you get paid, half now, half later. Classic setup. Very professional. Except that later never really comes. And if it does, it usually brings company. Armed company. Because when someone hires an assassin, they're not looking for a long-term relationship. They don't want to become pen pals. They don't want to run into you at market day and exchange pleasantries about the weather. They want you gone, preferably before you remember too much. So what happens after the job? You return to the tavern, sit in the agreed-upon corner, wait for the greasy scribe or the cloaked figure who smells vaguely of spoiled wine and regret. He doesn't show. The barkeep gives you a look. Not quite fear, not quite pity. Something in between. A man 2 stools over suddenly stands and leaves, fast. Something feels wrong, off. And you know, deep down, what's coming. Sometimes the client's just gone, vanished, took their goats and left the region. Sometimes they send someone to thank you, Knife first. Why pay a killer when you can just kill the killer? More efficient, more permanent. And when you do get paid, truly paid, it's rarely what was promised. Maybe they forgot the bonus. Maybe the silver was short. Maybe it wasn't even silver, just dull copper coins sticky with wine. You might demand fairness. You might reach for your blade. And then the guards show up. Because of course they do. You're not a person. You're a liability. A whisper too dangerous to let live. And nobody wants to share a drink with someone who knows how to make people disappear. Even when they do pay, you wonder, was it worth it? You risked your life, hid in a haystack with fleas and shame for 2 days, stabbed a bishop who definitely did not go quietly. And now you have a small pouch of metal that will buy stale bread, a bed full of lice, and about 12 hours of paranoid sleep before someone kicks in the door. It wasn't a reward. It was hush money. And sometimes, just sometimes, the job was a setup, a trap. The person you were hired to kill was expecting you. Guards waited. Crossbows were already aimed. Your client, working both sides. So clever. So tragic. And when you try to complain, where would you even go? My lord, I'd like to file a grievance. I assassinated the wrong man due to poor instructions and would like a refund on emotional distress. That courtroom doesn't exist. There is no justice for ghosts. So what do? You adapt. You start demanding payment up front. In coin. In person. Preferably with witnesses. Preferably armed witnesses. You don't trust anyone. Not the scribe. Not the noble. Not the old woman who gave you soup and said, "God bless your work, dear." You move fast, spend fast, disappear faster. And you learn something important. In this line of work, getting paid is not the reward. Surviving is. And even then, the price is rarely worth the purchase. So you've taken the job. You've been lied to. You're probably going to die. Let's talk gear. Forget everything you've seen in those polished slow-motion montages from modern fiction. There are no sleek wrist blades here, no smoke bombs, no collapsible crossbows that fit snugly into your boot. You're not a gadgeteer, you're not an artist of death. You're a man in a dirty cloak with whatever sharp thing didn't fall down a well this morning. The reality of the Assassin S toolkit in the Middle Ages was less arsenal and more whatever I could smuggle past a guard dog. Maybe, if you were impossibly lucky, you had a decent dagger. Nothing ornate. Nothing curved like a dragon S-fang with an obsidian hilt and a poetic name like Whisper. Just sharp, hopefully not too rusty, and preferably not still sticky from the last guy. And that's if you're prepared. More likely, you've stolen something off a drunk guard, a short knife, a broken piece of chain, or the classic, a rock wrapped in hope. Garrots? Sure, if you had time to braid something from horsehair or steal a length of rope from a stable. But let's be honest, nothing kills the momentum of a silent elimination like fumbling with a knot while your target starts screaming about the devil being in the pantry. Poison? Ah, yes. Poison sounds elegant, refined. A drop in the wine, a sigh, a death. Except, no. Medieval poisons were more like culinary Russian roulette, made from questionable herbs, fungus, or substances that also doubled as rat deterrent or foot salve. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they made the target nauseous for a week and then suspicious forever. Sometimes you drank the wrong cup because it was dark and you were tired. There was no medieval poison control. There was just the vague hope that your vial didn't smell too strongly of mushrooms and regret. Bows? Technically, yes. Realistically, no. A bow requires distance, skill, timing, arrows, and ideally, not trying to sneak one into a Lord S banquet while dressed as a herbalist with a limp. Most kills were close, quick, clumsy. The kind of job where you accidentally step on the cat, alert the house, and still manage to stab your way through the problem while slipping in chamber pot runoff. Improvisation was your only real weapon. A belt buckle becomes a brass knuckle. A wooden spoon becomes a shiv if you believe hard enough. A piece of stale bread? Blunt force trauma. Maybe. The point is, your tools were never the reason you succeeded. They bent. They broke. They slipped from your hands mid-strike. You succeeded because you didn't die. Because you moved faster than the man who saw your shadow. Because you stabbed down when others hesitated. And you never counted on your equipment. You carried your tools close, in hems, in boots, sewn into belts, tucked into hollowed-out loaves of bread if necessary. Not because they were precious, but because they were the only thing standing between you and a public execution with very bad audience participation. And if something failed, you improvised. Again, roof tile, hairpin, wooden flute. The truth was simple. You didn't need the best weapon, you just needed a weapon, something sharp or heavy or pointy. And you needed it before the guards arrived. There were no upgrades, no maintenance, no weapons chest back at your secret lair. Just a dirty satchel, a sharp rock and a prayer. And when the moment came, it wasn't your gear that made the kill. It was you, alone, ill-equipped, and somehow still breathing. By now you've figured it out. You're not here to kill Bob the sleepy shepherd. No one's paying coin for a guy whose most dangerous possession is a goat with attitude. No, you've been sent after a noble, a baron, a bishop, a military officer who hasn't walked unguarded since infancy. Congratulations, you've just been upgraded from desperate lunatic with a dagger to suicidal lunatic with a dagger. Let's break it down. First, the guards, not 2, not 5, dozens, big ones, well-fed, well-armed, often bored. And boredom, as you've probably noticed, makes men creative. You don't want creativity in your opposition. You want sleepy, you want drunk. Instead, you get Sir Gerald and his elite squad of sword-hugging insomniacs who all live for moments like this. They guard every entrance, every stairwell, even the privy, especially the privy. And they're not just meatheads with blades. Some of them have seen combat. Some have killed men for less than a suspicious cough in the corridor. And here you are in a second-hand servant's robe, pretending you know which end of the mop goes on the floor. Then the walls. Castles aren't welcoming places. They're puzzles with punishment for mistakes. You've got moats, drawbridges, murder holes, arrow slits, and boiling liquids. Because apparently lava baths were trending that century. Even if you get past the guards and the gates, you still have to scale walls that were designed specifically to not be scaled. Slippery stone, cold wind, no handholds. And you've been living on stale bread and paranoia for a week. Then there's the staff, the cooks, the scribes, the maids, the stable boys with eyes like hawks. They know every face, every noise, every footstep. You sneeze in the wrong hallway and someone asks whispering to the captain before you've wiped your nose. Servants are like medieval surveillance systems, only faster and more judgy. And if they catch you, it's not jail. It's not trial. It's the kitchen staff chasing you with cleavers while a priest starts prepping your last rites. Now let's say, somehow you do make it to your target. They're not alone. Ever. Nobles sleep behind locked doors, hidden rooms, secret passages. Some sleep in decoy beds. Others rotate bedrooms each night like paranoid royalty playing hide-and-seek with death, and forget poison at the feast. Your noble doesn't touch a meal that hasn't been sniffed by a dog, tasted by a servant, and blessed by a holy man twice. Even the wine has bodyguards. And if you think you'll strike at a public event, wonderful idea. Because you now have to get past the royal guards, a dozen dogs, a jester with a suspiciously alert expression, and 80 witnesses holding mugs of ale and zero discretion. Oh, and the target? They've been expecting this. They're paranoid. They're prepared. They've seen cousins mysteriously vanish after family dinners. They trust no one, not even their bathwater. So, when they hear a sound behind them, they don't assume it's the wind. They assume it's you, And you've got one shot, one clean, silent, flawless, blade-to-throat moment. Because if you miss, if they scream, flinch, duck, or trip over the cat, you're dead. Not caught. Dead. And not in a heroic blaze of glory. In a very awkward heap beside a chamber pot. So no, killing a noble isn't thrilling. It's miserable, it's tedious. It's hours of waiting, days of hiding, weeks of pretending you know how to empty a spittoon without vomiting. And when the moment finally comes, you don't feel victorious. You feel hungry, cold, exhausted, and already planning the next escape. Because now the hard part begins, getting out alive. Let's talk about fashion. Not the glamorous silk-draped kind, no. Let's talk about the itchy, flea-infested, desperately makeshift world of medieval disguises. Because while stories love to picture assassins in sleek black robes, faces half hidden beneath mystical hoods and moonlit cloaks that ripple just right in the breeze, the truth? You looked like a goat herder who got dressed in the dark. Let's start with the basics. There were no tailors for hire who specialized in silent murder wear. You wore what you could steal, borrow, or assemble from corpses who didn't need it anymore. That meant peasant rags that didn't fit, cloaks that smelled like 3 winters ago, a monk's robe 2 sizes too big, complete with holy stains and an aura of pious confusion. Nothing screamed, "I don't belong here," quite like someone pretending to be Brother Tobias, while nervously adjusting their belt every 6 seconds to keep a dagger from falling out of their cheesecloth wrap. And forget masks. You didn't have anything remotely artistic. No carved wood, no silver half-face. You had a hood, maybe. And if you tried covering your face with cloth, congratulations. Now you look like a leper, which is good for avoiding conversations, but bad for entering buildings that don't want plagues inside. And if someone asked who you were, you had to improvise. I'm a herbalist, traveling in silence for penance. Or the classic, I'm new, very new, uncomfortably new. Because nothing draws attention like trying not to draw attention. The best you could hope for was blending into the crowd. But medieval crowds weren't forgiving. They noticed things, like why the new kitchen boy didn't know where the cellar was, or why the washerwoman forgot the name of the Lord's dog, or why the supposed monk asked for directions to the rooftop at midnight. These people lived in tight spaces, small towns, with memories like iron traps. One wrong phrase, one "good evening, madam," when the culture expects blessings of the lantern to your bucket, and someone else already whispering, "Who is that?" And if you think you had backup plans, like wigs or false identities, think again. Wigs weren't really a thing. Dye was expensive. And trying to pass as older meant smearing dirt on your face, squinting and muttering something about the war that may or may not have existed. It was ridiculous, it was obvious, and it almost always ended in someone getting suspicious, and when they did, there were no second chances. Once your cover was blown, even a little, the entire world turned against you. Because people didn't say, what a curious fellow. They screamed witch or spy or intruder, while reaching for the nearest sharp object or pitchfork substitute. And even if you made it past all that, the guards, the gossip, the goat smell, you now had to stay in character. For hours, possibly days. Eating with the staff, sleeping near the pigs, pretending you belonged while silently rehearsing the route to the bishop's chamber at dawn. One slip, one wrong word, one sneeze in the wrong hallway. And that's it. Your disguise didn't protect you. It just gave you a 5-minute head start. Because you weren't invisible. You were noticed by everyone who was now just slightly too polite, slightly too quiet, and suddenly moving out of your way like they'd already decided what to write on your grave marker. In this line of work, you didn't have outfits. You had delusions with sleeves, and they didn't fool anyone, at least not for long. You didn't have a team. There was no sidekick with a crossbow waiting in the shadows. No handler whispering coded instructions over wine. No alchemist friend with potions or backup plans or reassuring nods. You had you, just you, and a dagger. And maybe a limp from a rooftop fall 3 jobs ago. Because in the world of medieval assassins, solitude wasn't a choice. It was the air you breathed. Let's be clear. If anyone knew who you were, your name, your face, your past, that was one more loose end waiting to be pulled. Even your clients rarely saw you. And if they did, they didn't want to again. The fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you lived. There were whispers, sure. Tavern rumors of a guild, a brotherhood, a silent order of killers who met beneath candlelit ruins and exchanged secrets like monks. But if it existed, you weren't invited. And if you were, well, that meant someone had already decided to make you disappear afterward. You didn't have friends, not real ones. Friends noticed bruises. They asked questions. They wondered why you disappeared for days and came back smelling like chimney soot and fear. You didn't have lovers. Too risky, too human. How do you explain the blade under your pillow? Or the way you flinch when someone touches your back? You didn't have a home, no little cottage with herbs in the window, just safe houses. And even those weren't safe for long. You moved. Constantly. Like a shadow that never quite landed. Even among criminals, you were alone. Thieves had camaraderie. Smugglers had networks. You were the one they avoided. The guy who made people disappear. The one they never wanted to owe a favor to. Because you weren't just feared. You were inconvenient. No one wanted to be seen next to you when the constable started asking questions. No one wanted your reputation near their stew. And you couldn't talk about it, not really. If you tried to explain the weight you carried, the eyes you remember, the blood on your hands, the silence that echoes long after the job is done, people didn't nod. They backed away. Or worse, they listened too closely. So you said nothing. At inns, you sat in the darkest corner, back to the wall, one hand on your tankard, the other on the hilt beneath your cloak. You never drank too much, never stayed more than a night. You never gave your real name. Or if you did, it wasn't your real name. Just one you borrowed, like everything else in your life. Being a medieval assassin meant perfecting the art of vanishing, not just in crowds, but from the possibility of a normal life, from companionship, from rest, from laughter that didn't feel forced. You lived in the quiet between betrayals, in the space between jobs waiting for the next name, always watching, always listening, never belonging. You weren't part of the world. You moved around its edges, a whisper that passed through rooms and vanished before the candle flickered. You weren't a hero. You weren't a villain. You were something else. Alone. Always. So you hesitated. Maybe the target turned unexpectedly. Maybe they were with their child. Maybe your hand, the one that had struck a dozen times before, trembled like a leaf in the wind. Or maybe you just missed. It happens, but not to you. Because in your line of work, failure wasn't awkward. It wasn't a stern talking to. It was death. And not the peaceful, heroic kind sung by bards. No. This death came slow, loud, and creative. Failure meant exposure, and exposure was fatal. Your target would raise the alarm. The guards would flood in, the same ones you studied for days. Suddenly, they're not sleepy men on rotation. They're adrenaline-fueled hunters with your description, your scent, your path memorized like scripture. Your name, or at least the name you were using that week, becomes a curse whispered from alley to alley. You were no longer a shadow. You were a threat, a public enemy, a lesson waiting to be carved into flesh and displayed at the city gate. Let's say you escape the scene, you slip down an alley, blend with the crowd, you think you're safe. You're not, because now you've got more problems. The client. Oh yes, the charming noble who gave you half up front and promised the rest once the job was done. He's furious. Not just because you failed, but because you're now a liability. You know his face, his plans, his secrets. And worse, you've made him look stupid. So he does the logical thing. He hires another assassin to kill you. You become your own profession's next target. A name on someone else's whisper. Or maybe the guards get to you first. They don't kill you outright. Oh no, that would be merciful. You're not just a criminal now. You're proof that someone powerful wanted someone else dead, which means they'll need answers. So they chain you up in a damp chamber beneath a castle no one even remembers exists. They don't ask politely. They don't send scribes. They send men with tools with names. The bone cracker, the tongue spoon, the rack, the pear of anguish. And no, it's not a metaphor. They'll start by asking who hired you, then who trained you, then who you've killed. And they won't stop asking, because the moment you stop talking, they start twisting. You might lie, you might hold out, but pain is a persuasive interrogator. Eventually your screams will echo through the stone corridors. They might even take notes, because your death, you see, isn't personal, it's educational. A lesson for others who might be tempted to follow your path. Maybe they hang you upside down in the marketplace. Maybe they build a small stage and have a monk say something holy. Maybe they burn you. Maybe they break you. Whatever the method, it's slow, it's public, and it's meant to entertain. Because when assassins fail, the audience gets a show. And if you manage to survive the botched job, the betrayal, the manhunt, and the interrogation, you don't come out the same. Your hands don't stop shaking. Your sleep becomes a parade of the faces you almost killed. Your knife feels heavier now, like it remembers too. Failure doesn't just mean death, it means legacy. The wrong kind. Because in this world, you're only as good as your last kill. And if your last kill didn't happen, you'd better start running. It worked. One clean strike, no screams, no flailing, just a gasp, a spasm, a body going still. Your dagger slides free like a breath held too long, and for 1 second, one glorious frozen second, you allow yourself to believe. It's done. You did it. But there's no applause, no reward screen, no swelling music, just silence. The kind that comes before someone shouts. The kind that feels like the whole world is holding its breath, right before it exhales fire. You don't get to savor this moment. There's no time to admire your work. The blade is already cooling, the body is already leaking, and somewhere, someone is about to ask, why is it so quiet? Because now you have a new job, escape. You mapped this out twice, 3 times. You rehearsed every step. Right turn, cellar door, through the laundry courtyard, climb the stable roof, jump into the hay cart. Simple. Until it isn't. Because the kitchen boy you bribed forgot which guard was on duty. Because the moon decided to show its full face tonight. Because your cloak got caught on the damn banister. Now your heart is pounding, your breath comes in tight, panicked gulps. You swear the footsteps behind you are getting louder, even if there are none yet. The plan doesn't matter anymore. You're not thinking. You're moving. You slip through alleys that reek of rot and wet stone. You dive through cellars where rats scatter like witnesses. You bribe a fisherman to take you across the river. No questions, no names, just coin and silence. You make it out. You live. But barely. Your hands are still shaking. Your boots are soaked. You're bleeding. You don't even remember when that happened. The coin purse you were promised, still in someone else's pocket, probably tossed in a fire, or handed to the next person hunting you. Because here's the part they never tell you in ballads. Success is just another kind of death. You've killed a baron, a bishop, a general, someone important enough to have friends, loyalists, cousins with armies, clerics with curses. You didn't just change history, you disturbed it, and now it wants to correct itself. You've got a target on your back the size of a cathedral. Every city gate knows your name. Every guard captain has your face, or something close enough, on parchment nailed to a tavern wall. Even your client, they're scared of you now. Because if you could kill one noble, what's to stop you from killing another? What's to stop you from becoming inconvenient? So they vanish. Maybe they send someone after you. Maybe they write your name in a book, underline it twice and mark it to be resolved. Meanwhile, you were washing blood out of your clothes in a stream outside a town that doesn't know your face. Yet, you tell the innkeeper your name is Brother Lucien. You pretend you're fasting. You pay in foreign coin, and you sleep with a knife under your blanket, tucked against your ribs like a guilty memory. There's no relief, no rest. Just the constant buzz of knowing someone somewhere wants to trade your breath for silence, because success wasn't the end. It was the signal. Now they're coming. Not out of justice, not even out of revenge. Just protocol. Because an assassin who finishes a job is dangerous. They've proven too much, slipped through too many defenses, held too many secrets. And the only thing more dangerous than a failed killer is one who's already proven they can win. So you made it. Somehow, against all odds and logic, you slipped away. You survived the job, you vanished from the scene. You weren't caught, tortured, or betrayed. Or at least, not fatally. The blade has been sheathed. The blood has dried. And no one's come knocking yet. It's been weeks, maybe months. You've moved twice, changed your name thrice. You've grown a beard, or shaved one. You've told 3 different towns you're a retired scribe, a traveling herbalist, and once a man of the cloth. They believed all 3, mostly because they didn't care. You rent a small room above a cooper's workshop. You help mend barrels in exchange for meals. You sleep on straw, drink rainwater, and keep your back to the wall at all times. Old habits die hard. But at night, at night, you wake up choking on nothing. You hear footsteps that aren't there. You replay the sound of that breath you ended, the one before the silence. You tell yourself it was for coin, for justice, for survival. But it doesn't matter, because no one else remembers. Not the town, not the crown, not even your client. They've all moved on. You, however, are stuck. Not in the past, not in guilt, in erasure. You don't have a real name anymore. No family, no records, no legacy. You're a ghost in your own story. And here's the cruelest truth of all. You were never meant to be remembered. Assassins don't get statues. No one commissions a tapestry for the man who made a baron vanish in 1273. You don't get a tavern song. You don't even get a grave, not unless you dig it yourself. Your best hope is to fade, quietly, without drawing attention, without sticking around long enough to be recognized or worse, recalled. Because the longer you stay still, the more likely someone will whisper, "Didn't you used to be?" And then it's over. So you keep moving, one village to the next, selling herbs, telling lies, sleeping with one eye open and a rusted dagger under the floorboard. Your hands are still calloused. Your reflexes still sharp. But your eyes are tired. Not from the running, not even from the remembering, but from the knowing. Knowing that there's no peace for a man who lived by silence. No home for a shadow. No love, no absolution, no final page. Just a slow, cold fade. Until one day the world forgets you completely. And maybe that's the best ending you could ask for. Not a noose, not a betrayal, just a slow disappearance. A whispered name, a vanishing trail. A man who once was and now isn't. Sleep comes eventually. Uneasy, shallow, quiet. The same way you lived. And if anyone asks, you were no one important. Just a man who walked with a limp, sold dried rosemary, and always Ghoul kept his back to the wall. And now, our tale has faded with him. Into the silence, into the dark. Thanks for wandering with me through this forgotten corner of history. May your night be still, your sleep be dreamless, and your name forever your own. Good night.